Okay, The Puppy Plays Shadow, Chapter 4. By the end of the weekend, the whole family was in love with Shadow, and he loved them all too. The puppy and the bean seemed to have an extra special bond. They were never apart. They roamed all over the house together. Sometimes the bean was toddling and the puppy was scampering after him. Sometimes Shadow was trotting ahead and the bean was trying to catch up to keep up. They napped together, curled up on a soft, fleecy dog bed, and took turns playing with the bean's favorite stuffed toys. Shadow seemed to think it was his job to protect and watch over the bean, as if the bean were a younger puppy who needed his care. Shadow was a good puppy. He was already mostly housebroken, and he usually whimpered at the door if he needed to go out. And he loved to cuddle. Lizzie spent most of Sunday evening with Shadow, sleeping on her lap while she watched a movie. She loved the little puppy noises he made in his sleep while she stroked his silky ears. Once in a while, he would wake part way up, stretch and yawn, and kiss her on the chin. That was the best. Lizzie and Charles had a hard time leaving the house on Monday morning when it was time to head for school. "Goodbye, Shadow," Lizzie said, scooping him up for one more hug. She kissed the top of his silky head. "You be a good boy, okay?" She put him down and he bounded back to the bean's side. Shadow was sorry to see the girl and boy leave, but now he could concentrate on the smallest person in the house. He loved his new friend so much. Charles and his best friend Sammy chattered about the new puppy all the way to school. Lizzie walked behind them, wishing she had a best friend too. It would be fun to tell somebody about all the funny things that Shadow had done over the weekend, like sticking his head into the bean's toy chest and pulling out a stuffed bear that was twice as big as he was. Charles was lucky. When the Petersons had moved to Littleton last summer, Charles had found a best friend who lived right next door. But there were no girls Lizzie's age in the neighborhood. She was friendly with most of the girls in her class, but she didn't have a best friend. Often at recess, Lizzie spent her time reading or looking things up on the computer instead of playing jump rope or kickball. Lizzie didn't really mind that, but once in a while she thought it would be nice to have someone to share her secrets or exciting news with. She thought about telling the whole class about Shadow during their morning meeting, but at the last minute she decided not to. Somehow she wanted to keep him to herself for a little while. Knowing she was going to have to find him a good home and give him up soon made him seem even more precious to her. Anyway, that day everybody was talking about Helen Keller. Mrs. Abson had asked how many of them had been reading the book over the weekend, and lots of hands went up. "What interesting things did you find out about Helen Keller?" Mrs. Abson asked. "I don't see how Helen Keller could climb trees and stuff like that," Noah said. "I mean, she couldn't see anything." "Blind people can do lots of things," said a girl named Maria Santiago, who was even newer to Littleton Elementary than Lizzie. Usually Maria was really shy. Lizzie was a little surprised to hear her speak up. "That's right," Lizzie said. "I found out this weekend I spent a lot of time wearing a blindfold so I could see what it was like to be blind. It wasn't so hard to learn my way around the house." Lizzie didn't mention how many times she had almost tripped over toys that Shadow and the bean had left lying all over the place. "The only thing was I didn't feel really blind because I could still see light and dark through the blindfold." Again Maria put up her hand. "Lots of blind people see light and shadow," she said softly. "The world isn't completely dark for most of them." Lizzie looked at her. All of a sudden, Maria was starting to seem like a little bit of a know-it-all. What had happened to the girl who hardly ever spoke in class unless she was called on? Lizzie shrugged. "Maybe," she said. "Another thing I noticed was that my hearing didn't really get any better. Supposedly, when you're blind, your other senses, like hearing and touch, start to make up for it. But maybe that takes a while to happen. Maria was shaking her head. Mrs. Epson called on her. Maria, did you have something to say? Well, only that it's kind of a myth that blind people can hear better, said Maria. Their hearing is the same. They just learn to pay more attention to what they hear. Mrs. Epson nodded. That makes sense, she said. Lizzie frowned. Wasn't that the same thing she had just said? And how did Maria know all this stuff anyway? Lizzie couldn't help but being curious. But Mrs. Epson had moved on to asking everyone to get their math homework out, so there was no chance to find out more. The rest of the day dragged by. Lizzie couldn't wait to get home and see Shadow again. When the last bell rang, she grabbed her jacket and met Charles and Sammy outside. The three of them ran almost all the way home.